Rwanda, a tiny country in Africa called the Land of 1,000 Hills and situated south of the equator with a deep cultural history. Rwandans were separated into the main subgroups of Tutsi and Hutu. The Belgians, who owned Rwanda from World War I to 1962, supported a pro-Tutsi government despite the Hutu being the majority and the Tutsi being a minority. In 1962, Hutu rebellion took over the government, but in 1990, the Tutsi group of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, launched into a civil war to fight for Tutsis in Rwanda. The civil war was supposedly ended by the Arusha Accords in 1993, but tensions carried on. In April 1994, ethnic tensions and the murder of President Juvenal Habyarimana would lead to the Rwandan Genocide, a massacre of Tutsis and moderate Hutus by government-supported extremist Hutus and the government-supported paramilitary group of the Interahamwe. The genocide would take the lives of up to 1 million people, of almost 20% of Rwanda's population. Many people abandoned all reason, religion, and thought and became driven by pure hatred.
bavuze ko gahunda ari ukwica abantu ngo Habyarimana yapfuye.
Yet while millions were slaughtered in Rwanda, the world stood and watched. The French president, François Mitterrand, said, "In countries such as these, genocide is not too important." Countless other countries failed to act, and UN troops in Rwanda were given explicit instructions not to go out and try to save people. As the world sat and watched, three different men, Paul Rusesabagina, a hotel worker, Carl Wilkins, a member of an Adventist development group, and Mbai Diagne, a Senegalese UN soldier, decided to do something and take a stand. They are from different countries, different occupations, and from different walks of life, and all did different things during the genocide in order to save people, but one thing united them, their desire to take a stand using diplomacy and action.
Diplomacy. All three men were great at resolving issues and saving people peacefully. Carl Wilkins, for example, was able to negotiate and convince the Hutu Prime Minister, John Kambanda, who backed the Hutu militias in the killings, to spare the lives of children at Gisimba orphanage. He was also able to end the genocide by seeking the help of top-ranking Hutu officials, many who were perpetrators, by being reasonable and making deals with them.
I don't think it's so much about what I said to him as the fact that I was physically there in his presence. It's very, very hard to fully appreciate the power of presence. We often think it's something we said or did, and being present is something you do, but it's also not like, often we think, well, I was present. You're like, well, what'd you do? and no, I was present. Just being physically present, putting the request there.
Captain Mbai Diagne of Senegal was a great diplomat and a talker as well. Instead of threatening people with weapons, he was able to get what he needed with money and conversations. Diagne was assigned in Kigali for UNAMAR under Commander Romeo Dallaire. He was able to get through checkpoints with civilians in his car on a daily basis because of his extensive military contacts and ability to engage in conversations with the Hutu officials. He was also able to escape tough situations with quick jokes and bribes of money, cigarettes, and alcohol, despite being a strict Muslim. He was extremely skilled at diffusing tough situations. For example, one time he saved his commander's life by bribes and humor.
He loved joking with people. He loved talking, says one of his former comrades in the UN mission, Babakal Faye, now a colonel in the Senegalese army. In his car, he would have cases of beer, bottles of whiskey, and lots of packets of cigarettes, said Faye. And he always had wads of cash. I once saw a list of names on a scrap of paper that had fallen out of his pocket. It was a list of first names, Pierre, Marie, with sums of money written next to them, $10, $30, and so on. He had allocated money as bribes to save different Tutsis in government-controlled areas.
Paul Rusesabagina had a similar role in keeping the Hutu militia away from harming civilians at the Hotel Los Mille de Colina using bribes and attempting to convince Western powers to intervene. Even though his attempts for Western involvement were largely unsuccessful, he was still able to get the UN to keep peacekeepers at the Hotel Los Mille de Colina. It was also his incredible diplomacy skills that kept the Hutu militia outside the gates of the hotel. He extensively sought help from overseas, but as well as contacts within militia groups. As he once said, the militia came to the Mille Colina all the time throughout the killings. They would pop in, have a drink, and chat with me. If you want to keep an eye on someone, you keep them close to you.
Action. By far the biggest thing these men did was take action. Carl Wilkins, the only American left in Rwanda, took action to save Tutsis from Hutu militias. When the genocide started, Wilkins originally stayed in his house to help the Tutsi workers living there. Wilkins and his wife agreed that leaving the Tutsis for dead was the wrong thing to do. So his wife and his children left for Burundi, while Wilkins stayed in order to help those seeking refuge. He would go out sometimes to help people on rescue missions. One of Wilkins's most notable rescue missions was that of Gasimba Orphanage. Wilkins noticed a large amount of armed Interahamwe members outside, but realized they did not want to attack with Wilkins there. He stayed the night with over 400 orphans and workers in order to protect them. In the morning, he left them with 4 grenades as he went to find the governor in order to try and get some support to protect the orphanage.
They shot the back window out of my car, which once was more than enough. There were times I had many bullets that came in the house. I had a little sock full of bullets.
Wilkins persevered through the shooting, and after Wilkins used his diplomacy to negotiate the safety of children, Wilkins went back to the orphanage and used his connections to get an armed bus convoy to transport the orphans to St. Michael Cathedral. Mbe Diagne was also someone who took action against the genocide. When the president's plane was shot down, the Presidential Guard betrayed Prime Minister Agathe Uwilingiyilama and murdered the UN peacekeepers, as well as herself and her husband. Later, Diagne and other UN workers arrived at the compound and found her children hidden. Despite lacking authorization to move the children, Diagne stepped up and drove the children to the safe haven of the Hotel Mille de Collines.
Diagne also saved many at the Saint Famille Church compound from Interahamwe militiamen and radicalized priests. UN rules of engagement prohibited the UN peacekeepers from going out to try and save people, but Diagne ignored these orders and went out to save many people. Mbe Diagne could have listened to his UN commander's orders, but with sheer courage, he went through dozens of Hutu roadblocks with Tutsis hidden in the back of his jeep, because he was determined to save the people from almost certain death at the hand of the Hutu militias. The head of the humanitarian missions in Rwanda said, "Here's someone who stepped out of line, and the general is not going to discipline him because he's doing the right thing." Diagne died trying to negotiate peace and bring messages between Hutu militias and the UN.
People in Rwanda was a terrible statistic, and the death of the single Senegalese officer was a tragedy. The late Captain Jan's Senegalese companion.
The U.S. State Department estimates that Diagne saved up to 600 lives. Paul Rusesabagina took action by helping to secure the Hotel Mille de Collines as a refuge. When the manager of the hotel fled, Rusesabagina secured permission from the hotel owners to become the manager. Because of his actions, the hotel had become a safe haven during the genocide, and people fled across to the government and rebel-controlled zone to seek refuge. Rusesabagina used his resources to ward off the Hutu militia that lingered outside the hotel and was successful in doing so, because not a single refugee was harmed. When the RPF reclaimed the city and ended the slaughter of the Tutsis in Kigali, many survivors from the hotel were protected by the UN and survived the genocide under the watch of Paul Rusesabagina.
The amount of people that these 3 men saved tallies to be up to over 2,000, and by sheer action and diplomacy, these 3 men were able to impact the lives of millions in Rwanda by taking a stand. Edmund Burke once said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Unfortunately, there were not enough good men to stop the evil despite the efforts of these men who chose to take a stand to stop the genocide. As humans, we must never forget the lives and the people lost in Rwanda, and how it could have been avoided if more people had taken a stand.